Our next speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to someone who's considered one of the leading architectural photographers in the world practicing today. She's worked with the likes of Daniel Libeskind, Peter Zumthor, and Zaha Hadid. And a few months back, I read a very interesting interview of her on a website called Design Boom, where she emphatically talks about how she is troubled by digital photography. She's someone who works purely with film, the old school way. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for HÉLÈNE Binetet.
And thank you very much for inviting me here today. I have so much to say, but I have to try to condense. And one of the things that, first of all, I wanted to say is that I was a bit sad to come here just for a few days. And India is such a complex and rich and amazing country. But thanks to all your presentation, I feel I'm traveling. And that's really wonderful. I'm encountering so many projects, so many ways of thinking, and it is really a gift. So thank you for invitation, but thank you for all the people that are also speaking today, representing a really kind of dynamic and inspiring way of thinking now about our planet, our future, our life. I'm going to talk about photography. I'm a photographer. And I really want to define what is a photographer. Photographer, it's a craft. It's somebody that has been thinking and doing things for a long time in his life and has a position, has learned to do something with his hand, with the brain, with the sensibility, and is trying to communicate to the world something with the limitation of a very simple tool, a beautiful tool. And in my case, I'm concerned about space. I'm concerned about somehow bringing some of the quality of the space, how they've been built, what they are, how do we feel, how do we connect. So I think it's very important to think that photography, it's photography. It's not space. It's not architecture. It's a profession which has a lot of history, background, knowledge. And I think now we are a little bit confused between what we do with our cell phone and photography. And maybe one day we have to find two different terminology because they all have their value. I really value the very quick photograph that everybody can do and communicate, but it has nothing to do with the work of a photographer. I've been engaged with this profession for about 30 years. I was very lucky to meet wonderful people like Zaha Hadid, Daniel Libeskind, Alvin Boyarsky, that was running the Architecture Association, that gave me the opportunity to start to photograph architecture. And I keep their energy, their inspiration with me every time I look at something. There's one sentence that Zaha Hadid, I'm not going to show his work today, told me at the beginning. It was an incredible man, quite big, quite thoughtful. And he said, you know, HÉLÈNE, architecture, it's one of the most complex forms of art. You are digested by it. You are enter and you're going to be changed by this experience. None other art can influence you so much like architecture. And since then, I try to figure out what are these enzymes that are touching you when you go into space and change you. And of course, it has nothing to do with photography. We go to a space, we smell, we dream, you're architect, you know plan, you have been struggling doing this project, you have cold or warm, you know that there's been a space before you enter. There's nothing to do with photography. If I put a description of photography, I put a description of architecture, and I try to join them, no way. But we have something. We can displace our work. Architecture can't. We can bring them to a book. We can bring them to a wall. We do prints. We can move with this art. For architects, it's a bit hard. So there's this very complex relationship that over years have been built with, I think, a lot of rethinking about what is photography needed. I also have to say today I'm going to show my work, but my work, you see it in print. You see with the paper I chose, with the care I've done in making it. It's nothing to do with what you're going to see on the screen. It's really a craft that you have, if you put your nose very close, you discover more and more. So there's a lot of passage between what I do and what now you're going to see on the screen. There's quite a lot of work. Maybe sometime I'm going to stop a bit longer on some photographs, some other I'm just going to run through because they are dear to me and I didn't want to miss them and not to share with you. But I'm going to start with the work that I'm still doing, which is to photograph historical architecture from South Korea. I think it's somehow something that is not very well known and let's say to the wider public and also the architect. We know a lot about Japanese architecture, but not so much about the Korean. Korean also have been heavily destroyed by the war, and I think there's a lot of missing building. But in the countryside, you still find temples, school, and a sanctuary which are still together. In that case, what I'm going to show you, it's a school that was built in maybe 1600, and it's a school for Neo-Confucius. So if you know a little bit about the Confucius, in that case it's a Neo-Confucius, which is a way of thinking, a way of learning. And in the case of Korean, it also has a spiritual aspect. But what interests me a lot in this building is some of the choice of how they were building at the time, but also by being a school, it's a space of transition. And in one of my more recent work, I'm really trying to focus on understanding this, how space can transform in, how do you go through a space, and what are the spaces that are really transitional, where you come, the sacred place is the most well known, that you come from the outside and then you are brought to the spirituality through material, through light, through thinking, depend on the religion. But I'm trying to expand that to different types of building. So in that case, I was delighted to be asked to photograph this building. Forget about the little marks, it's a foggy sky. And I wanted to concentrate on the issue of the transition. So in one slide, you see this building in the middle of the fog. Very important aspect of the Neo-Confucius is that the kids had to learn from nature. They had to learn by looking outside to understand. There's a lot about learning from the ancestor, but also looking at nature. So it's the beginning of the essay. The nature is blurred, it's just fog. And the opposite of this entrance, with a similar shape, you have a little gate into the end of the building where you see a bush, nature. So what I'm doing, I'm trying to bring two photographs together. And one, why I was saying that photography can displace, is very beautiful possibility to create pair, triptych, series, books, which I think are very beautiful expression of space. And to create that tension where I think mentally you create a space. You started to bring the quality of a photograph from one to the other. And you see, why does she use a similar rectangular shape for the window and the door and put them together? They have a division between the sky and the ground. The ground looks like it's reflecting the sky. All of this observation, it's not mathematical. It's two spaces that are facing each other. But it is about when you bring together, I think it's a very spatial moment of observation. And I'm not telling you the truth about a building. I'm not telling you what it is. Like Peter Zumthor said, if you want to know my building, go and see them. There's no other way. I'm telling you my story, which hopefully will be inspiring enough to bring you with your own thought somewhere close to this building. But I have no pretension to be now showing and make you feeling you are in Korea, not at all. And in this series of photographs, I gave a lot of importance to the nature, to the present, but also to this transition. There is these stairs that go under this fantastic, it's one of the classroom bridge, they call it the 7th window of the world, where there's this framing of the nature where you can see outside. But it's also a series of steps in life where you go up and then slowly you arrive to a very simple courtyard. And I was fascinating. All the rest, it's crafted. You will see how it's crafted. It's a very rough way they build. They use a stone, and it's the shape of a stone, a wood, it's a piece of a tree. They're not going to refine like the Japanese. But then I was thinking, this is a beautiful transitional space. It's a canvas for thinking. It's not defined. The kids are just coming to learn. They're probably lost. And this ground is just gravel, and it just has the different shadow of the tree during the day, probably some little flower falling during the spring. And I found that it was a very beautiful, a poetic way of really representing and making you feeling what is a transitional space and what architecture can do for you to prepare you to learn. These are some of the examples how things are built there. As you can see, the relationship between the wood and the stones is so direct, it's so structural, it really also takes you back to the natures. Some more details about how they brought it together, the material, but also the shadows of the tree seems to be almost like, I don't know, an analogy with the brain getting completely overwhelmed by thinking. And then there's always this relation with pairing that I like to do. Is the stone the hill, or is the hill the stone? So they are two different parts of the building. They're not facing each other in that case. But again, because you are not there, I want you to somehow start to think. And I think the moment your eyes go from one point to the other and start to realize that there's maybe some analogy, a very powerful moment of your observation. Again, some reference to the surrounding that bit by bit come into the spirit of the people that are there. Now it's kind of museum, it's open, you can go. It doesn't have really a kind of structure of a museum. I really like that. You can go and just sit. There's no ticket, there's no entrance, there's not much signing, and you can enjoy the landscape. From a diptych, you can go to a triptych, and there again it's the playing with forms, and maybe there it looks a little bit dark, but I'm playing with the rectangular where you see the nature in different height and allows you to think about the step of going somewhere. But also at the end, you see on the last photograph on the right that there is a little column, and it is the sacred place. And nothing is symmetric there. I really love it because you don't have like a passage where you are at the center and you know you have to grow in kind of direct line. At one point, it's going in a different way, like nature. Nature seems to be symmetric, but it's not. And at the end, this beautiful stone, this is in a sacred space where there was the stone where they do sacrifice. I don't know what exactly, but somehow it's the most important part of this building when you're allowed to enter the sacred space. So this is one of the projects I'm doing right now. Hopefully in May I go back to do another building. I also want to go back there to maybe photograph it with the flower, with the spring, and to reflect more on this empty space, this canvas for thinking. I am very lucky that sometime I have a scholar phoning me and saying, I found a little project for you. I always thought that it's for you. Could you photograph it? It's nothing to do with a big iconic architecture. It's something really special, and please go and photograph. And in that case, it was a professor from the university in Los Angeles, Victor Jones, that is spending his life studying this bridge, which is well known by the Italian architect. It's in the center of Italy. It's behind Napoli, 2 hours driving inland. It was built in the 70s. It's a quite remote part of Italy where in the 70s they were trying to help traffic, communication, relationship between the place of work and the place of living. And this architect, I think he was an engineer, Sergio Musmeci, that had been working with Nervi also, decided to play with his knowledge and to bring it to the extreme of possibility of building at the time. You can imagine, and they had no computer to draw, no simulation possible. And if you have a possibility to do a bit of research, you will see all the photograph of the models he built to understand how far he could stretch the bridge. I really wanted to show this work today. Of course, it's part of the transitional space, even if there I think it's quite different from a normal bridge, because I wanted to talk about the importance of the hand in making, and I really celebrate the relationship that we have between our brain and our hand, and that's why I am an analog photographer. I wouldn't like to miss the time that is slow and I'm in a dark room and I do a print which is never going to be the same the next one, and I have to be very precise. And I think in this bridge you really see the love of the hand of who made it and thought about. The making was probably very difficult. It's inland, so he went to the sea and gathered all the boat maker of the area of Napoli and asked them to make the mold to make this incredible bridge. Zaha Hadid was very inspired actually from it, so it's not an unknown piece of architecture, but it's probably not very much published. So there I really wanted to also go back to some of the thinking that I've been sharing reading the book of Yannis Palasma about how do we feel and how do we enter a space and how do we get to know something. It's very strange coming from a photographer, but I think sometimes we think the eyes is the view of everything. Even if Aristotle says it's the window of the soul, sometimes I think it's not. And we celebrated very much let's say, the power of the eye when we don't realize that there are so many parts of our body that are engaged when we enjoy a space or when we live and we get the possibility of being somewhere. So I think that strange animal that somehow is going through the nature is really a representation of this feeling. It's quite sometimes smelly, sometimes cold, you feel it under a train, a bit of water and a street, so you have all the different noises of the place. Yes, it's a wonderful piece of architecture, so it was a real nice moment to photograph it. I'm going to carry on, and I'm going to go very quickly through this other bridge that I thought because they were shown in the same exhibition in Paris about a year ago, I didn't want to leave it behind. And it's by Seraphine, he's an architect from Norway that did very beautiful building, and I had the chance to photograph one of his museum. It's a museum where you have, I think, old artifact, and he just create a passerelle. It create that connection that links all the different parts and penetrate the building to after become staircase and part of the building to come out again. It is definitely a place of transition again. It is something that I enjoy photograph with this gray end of the summer weather. In the winter they close it down, it's too cold. I wanted to photograph it with this light. As a photographer, you try to get ready as much as possible with the weather, with looking at the drawings, looking at the sketch of an architect if you can, to just see what it was at the beginning, what was the first idea. And I was saying, okay, I'm going to try not to have shadows. For once, it shouldn't be too Mediterranean. I grew up in Rome, so light and shadows are really important. But still, there was one sticking out, very important shadow that I love. It's the one under, where it allows you to feel that the floor, it's not actually flat, but it has this very hilly. So when you photograph, you prepare yourself. There's a lot of studying, but you have to be surprised, and that's the wonderful part of our profession, and also to see a nice building that you are surprised by things I didn't expect to meet any shadows that day, but I did. Daniel Libeskind and this particular building is very dear to me, and it was very influential in me starting to photograph architecture. I photographed it mostly during the construction, and that was a very special moment for this building. I also photograph construction of other buildings, especially Zaha Hadid. I did it in the past. It's the childhood of a building. It's its only concept. It's not yet all the other parts that are necessary, like fire escape and door and heater. But I think I'm quite poetically attracted by this moment where it's very rough and you can see maybe some of the first idea of the architect. And maybe again you discover things you didn't expect. The building, it's the Jewish Museum. It's about the history of the absence of the Jew and the culture of all the German Jews over many centuries. But then there is this very difficult part, which is the one of the last war, where the Nazi wiped out a big part of all the Jewish community there. So it's about absence, and the way he managed to embody this absence with a void, it's extremely powerful. But the void is full of light, so it allowed me to think a lot about the light and how it can embody an absence. But light became this presence. It's not the shadow. Most of the time we think about shadows for something that is not anymore. But in that case, it was the opposite. And it was fantastic to also be there. And you know, it's a zigzag building. And by chance, some light came in and they created that zigzag on the floor, completely, you know, not part of the project. And then a line and a point came by just being there. So it is also something very important for architects, is the line and the point. You start from this when you draw. And then at the end, I was more and more attracted by the window, which were in process. Nothing was finished, and I made this series of photographs that talks about these lines that are hitting the floor and this light that are hitting the floor. And I felt my camera is the same. It's like it was a duet between this camera and this building where light is penetrating and touching and changing something on the floor the same way that it's doing with my camera. And that's the result of this, this dialogue. Here I'm going to talk about a very beautiful architect called Van der Land. He was Dutch and he built mostly a monastery. Again, not very well known, but quite complex personality. He designed not only the monastery, but the clothes, the furniture, everything. I was very shortly in the St. Benedictus and did few photographs. I stayed longer with the Rosenberg, which is a monastery for ladies, so I was also allowed to live with them, which I was not allowed in St. Benedict. The first encounter that I had was really playing with light. So there's a lot to say about light. We photographers, that's what we work with. We work with light. So maybe some of the things have been said many times, but every time I encountered again, I'm amazed and I enjoy life and I enjoy the celebration that light can do on material. You probably all know this quote of Louis Kahn that said, "The sun never knew how beautiful he is before he shines on the stone." And that stayed in my brain to say, there's no way we can know the light and the quality of the light without the material. If not, how does it express itself? And there's no way we know the material without the light. And that duality, I mean, for you architect, must be mind-blowing. And as a photographer, it's also wonderful. So I can't stop to play with light and enjoy light. I think a white wall would be also a very interesting, let's say, stimulation for the brain to start from. But I don't know why I start with the dark. I start with the shadow, and things come out of it. It's complicated to say how much the darkness is important to bring the light and how is it articulated. But maybe some of the image, sometimes I think about a piece of music and I think, oh, if we didn't have silence, we couldn't have the articulation of the music. We need a piece to start it to finish. We need the silence. And I think with light it's the same things. We need that silence, that moment of no energy with the shadow, to be able to articulate all the light that we try to capture. You first with the building and then me with the camera. And that's one of the let's say, most playful image I made there, which is just a little bench with a line of light, which is actually a big wall, but by being just in axe, it can become a line. My relationship with the other monastery was more complex because I could live there and be with the nun. It was the last week that they could live there. They had to move away because it was not affordable for 4 or 6 old nuns to live there. So it was very emotional also. And again, I felt this building is changing, it's going to become something else, and I concentrated on the space of transition, the corridor, the entrance, and the place where you move from the sacred to the domestic. Most of the time, I don't photograph people in building. Buildings are made for people, I have no doubt. So I don't think there's a confirmation of the quality of the buildings if you put a person. The person, anyway, it's a construction. Anyway, it's a moment where you decide to make the photograph and you can manipulate it as a photographer completely. So I think it's not a validation of the building. I would say, I would like you to enter my photograph. It's more important for me. And if you have a narrative of a person, it takes you away. It's immediately a story, it's which period, what they were doing. The human shape is so strong. And if you can dream 1 second to be in that bench, I'm happy. And I think if somebody's there, you're not asked to enter the picture, you stay out. But it's not a religion. I photographed the nun. They were so beautiful, and they were there for the last week, so I photographed them, and you will see them coming into my photograph. And also they had the clothes that were designed by the architect. So yes, there are things that I really believe, but like I don't show today, I went to Gianta Marta, I photographed the observatory, and it was quite intense because I really wanted to follow only these little shadows, because it was an exhibition about shadow in architecture. And you go to India and then you want a photograph with no people. They came out and it was wonderful because it was there. So it was natural. Sometimes somebody was there. So it was very happy. Here again, a series of photographs which are joined together, and you started to figure out, why they are together, what is this space, but also I was quite enchanted by this little hook for the coat that are there. And if you want to think about transition, you think about changing your clothes to go to another place. I think those little moments of architecture are also very beautiful to help you to think about that. And is the column the light, or is the light the column? They don't have anything to do with each other. One is the window and the other one is the column. But again, I think in the moment you have them together in 2 pages, your brain started to recreate a space. A series of gray moments. I must say my print is much more successful to show you this very, very subtle change of material that he was able to do to bring you from one space to the next. And here they are, my dear little nun, washing the dish and inviting me to be with them. They were singing. They were very lively and warm people. And they came very naturally into the photograph. I was glad I could record also the last few days of their life there. So they have a very simple life where every day they will do the same things. So, and then this image of them ringing the bell and connecting with the outside world just with the sound was so beautiful. And that's how I stopped this little photographic essay. Again, Le Corbusier, and this fantastic experience I had to live there in La Tourette, and for this essay about shadow in architecture. And I made a very well-structured essay about all the different shadows of the space and the influence they have on you to go to pray, to go to normal life. But then I was completely amazed by this window, by this series of windows that I'll go a little bit forward and then backward, that was designed to enter the corridor that takes you to the main church. They were designed by a collaborator of Le Le Corbusier, Dimitri Xenakis. After being an architect, he became a composer. And I think in this window, you really feel the complexity of a musician try to orchestrate light to create something that allows you to get ready to enter the sacred space. But the most beautiful part, sorry, I'm a bit jumping up and down, it's when the lights started to do strange sounds, they meet each other, maybe they're not so clearly taking you to an easy path. Sorry, this is about soft shadow. I have to redo my presentation, but I want to talk mostly about this corridor. But then I photographed the instrument that was this window. This window is, for me, was the instrument, and it's very tight little piece of concrete that when you're sideways, they become closed, and when you're in the front, they become open, and the sun outside moves and enters more or less. So this relation between the sun, the camera, and the window was a very lively moment for me. A bit of color. You're going to think why I don't photograph in color. I photograph because I'm a photographer. I don't think that I'm bringing you the space, but my interest is in communicate something to you. And as you can see, I like detail, I like quietness, like Aristotle say again, you know, you hear better in the darkness. So moment of silence are really important. So I don't want to overwhelm you with picture what you, because sometimes there's this confusion with architecture, photography. Architecture is so full on as an experience that you, as a photographer in the beginning, you tend to do wide angle, color, extra, extra, extra to compete. But I think the only way to deal with this, reduce. I'm going to tell you one thing. So sometimes I talk about the color and I celebrate the color, but it's one of the moments of the space. If you're blind and you walk there, you feel everything, but you don't see the color. If you're in the dark and there's no light, is the color there? You need the light to see the color, to exist, to bring it out. If not, there's no color. So for me, I'm quite happy to see that color is one of the moments of the experience of space. And then this beautiful photograph where I was again talking about shadows, and Le Corbusier said we need to frame the world to be able to see some part. Of course, I love that because it really referred to what I just said, that we need moment of quietness to be able to understand very specific moment of the world. So I thought, oh wow, beautiful. He's been drawing shadows that allowed you to see just few things of the outside world. I've done lots of work for Peter Zumthor, and we need just one full lecture to talk about all the work I've done for him. And today I see the clock running, so I'm getting very nervous. But I could not bring a little bit of his work to share with you. We started a collaboration, I don't know, it was 96, so now the clock is really passing, and we've done a lot of projects together. It was a very natural collaboration where he asked me to photograph his building. He said, Hélène, don't ask me to show to you. I know them well. Let's go and listen to some music. And I went to his studio, listened to music, look at his drawing, look at his sensibility, try to understand what was... I was very young, I didn't know who he was even. And I think that was very important to see where he was coming from, what did he like. And it was this process of my sensibility, my interest in how to talk about space, and his own that came very naturally together. So I was very, I think, very fortunate to be able to sit for 1 week alone in a thermal bath of Vals, which is, you know, beautiful place, not easy to reach, and just play with stone, light, and water. And I think water in that case is really one of the building kit of his architecture. And create those moments where you create doubts. What is the building? What is light? What is... some of these lines that you see are actually 6 meters spanned window, but by being just at the edge, I don't see the window, you have a line that somehow go then into the water and plays with other lines that are coming from the ceiling. I just wanted to say a few things just to share about how I think about space. This is well-known Columba, the museum he built in Cologne. And when I was photographing, I was thinking, you know, he'd always talk about atmosphere. It's so important. He creates atmosphere for people to feel good, to feel inspired. What is this atmosphere? Where is it coming from? And then I was looking at all these different moments of light. And I thought, oh, wow, they are really, he managed to orchestrate the light. It's like all these sounds. Again, you enter a music hall and there's an orchestra playing. And that moment, your heart explodes because you feel that all these sounds are moving together in the right way. He does it with light. That's what he does. He managed with the different opening, with the different material, sometimes soft, sometimes harsh, to orchestrate this body of light that allows you to feel and to feel so good in his place. So here there's a little story for me of the slide entering and somehow being sharp on the ceiling, becoming an object that the one of the entrance of the church of Schwarz, and then becoming very soft when it's about embracing the sculpture of the Madonna. Very quickly, Zaha Hadid, she's been very dear to me, very important, very supportive. I worked for her since the first little table that she did in '88 in the Architectural Association. She was very keen that her building would be photographed in lots of different ways and not by one eye. And I really respected that. She said, and you know, I just want many, many points of view. But she always asked me to go and to photograph the working side. And I think I'm very proud to have that position. I'm very happy I could work because I think I show something that sometime of her work was not considered enough. How primordial her shaping of her building, how connected to the creation of the world they were connected, how based on, you know, lava formations, almost dune formation. It was considered sometimes too light, too extravagant, but there is something in her very, very, very related to the creation of the world. And when I was in Scotland and I was allowed to go on the roof of this museum, I was delighted to have a little break of a terrible day of rain and to be able to, you know, bring out some of the reference that I thought were in that bridge when I thought about maybe the dune formation and other projects she worked on. Construction side were always important for her, to see how things were built and to play with the, you know, the thinking behind the making of a form. This is one of the photographs that I like very much of the Maxi in Rome, the city where I grew up, where it's almost becoming a bird that flies away. And this is this diptych again. Normally it's a little bit less dark, and you see down the end of this hall. For me, it's a very feminine photograph and building, but it also showed the mold before and then the constructions and the powerful tool that she used about how to create forms. Vitra, the construction side, and also details of the roof from the fireman. But why did I bring these two photographs together? It's just that I was extremely touched one day when she wrote a little text for catalog, and she said that some of my photographs have been important, but also an inspiration for next building. And I thought, oh, that's wonderful. And I keep thinking, which one? But I don't know which one. And sometimes I think maybe this working side where the wind has been just moving a piece of polyform that was there and this curve, I don't know, but maybe it is, maybe it is not. But I was very touched by her comment. There's so many things I wanted to say, but we have to carry on. I grew up in Rome, and I love Rome, and I probably had a great influence. And I was lucky to be there in the 70s. I had a very free education, home educated, a lot of free time running around. And going into the churches, admiring Caravaggio and playing on the steps. I mean, it was not the thing that you go and visit. You play on the step with other kids, you go to visit something and you go to something else. There was not so much tourists, not so much traffic. And they were part of me. And when I was asked to, I was there in Rome, and Zaha Hadid this incredible installation at the Villa Medici where she was asked to do something with an artist, and she wrapped with 30 kilometers of red rope the sculpture, which is the myth of Niobe, a terrible story of this. Of Niobe was too proud to have 9 children, and she lost them all. And there's this terrible battle of her and the children that she lost. And this red rope is somehow wrapping the sculpture. The screen is too contrasty, and it doesn't make justice to the print where I play with the nature, the sculpture, and this rope. But what was for me very important in that case, it was the scale of the project, where I can walk around as I want to. As a photographer, I don't do drone or things like that. I need to be behind my camera. And I could be in many positions because it's small. It's a sculpture garden. It's not a big building. And I try to play the drama of this story by leaving void in the middle of the photograph. And if you know Caravaggio and you look at this dramatic painting, you will see that the center, it's a void most of the time. You have these terrible things happening where there's a horse, and there's a dead, but the center is dark and a void. So I try to structure the story around a void-centered framing. Few things, very important things. I'm running over time very soon, but yes, what I wanted to say, I tried to read time to time. I'm not an academician, but I started to be inspired by other people that have been thinking about space. And Gaston Bachelard said something so beautiful. He said, how memory is anchor into space. First of all, I love that image, anchor. I see a little boat that is trying to run away. This is our memory, but it has a little anchor that keeps him there. And I started to think, what a beautiful sentence to think about our memory. And how do we, he said it's not narrative, it's not duration, it is space. You remember the most important things of your life through space. And I thought, what incredible gift to tell us this and to think about how do we look at photograph, and do we look at this photograph, or do we look at all the memory we have now of a column and a wall and a brick that you've seen in your life, and you have your other story, your own story entering. And this is my wish, and that when you look at this photograph, you enter all the wall of your childhood, of your life, and bring them together to understand a space. So I play with something quite special in that case. I started to think, who has been walking there? This is the pavement of a church in Deventer, in Holland, that is really very worn out. And I imagine characters that have been walking there. And this is a detail of a Rembrandt painting. And I thought, maybe somebody like this have been there. So it's this possible story of somebody walking there, or many people walking there, that made that ground, that floor, that stone what it is. And the same in Bologna, with this beautiful, I put the camera on the floor, I really feel this out of focus, doesn't matter, I really feel the material, and then it's a detail of a painting. Maybe I'm going to run through this photograph to be able to talk about the last project. This is just photograph that I put together because I have to deal with ground. And I was fascinating a lot all through my career about people that work to make the quality of the ground. I think it's a very feminine thing. And yesterday we talked about architecture, feminine, and I think that there's something very feminine in appreciating to give quality to this very normal, how do you organize your life, where do you go, how do you feel, where things are, just by the ground, not by erecting, but just leaving it there. So the project, a different project around the Acropolis, Dimitri Picchionis, a collage of stone just to be able to see the Acropolis. The square in Kalmar, done by Caruso St. John, where this helped the organization of the city, the market, the living, the shadows that are just representing the different aspects of the square. And then Jeffrey Bauer, that I had the chance to photograph many years ago, the garden of his own home. and the sense of time that is endless there, because I realized the shadow don't change so much over the years, and for me it was a revelation when the garden said, I go to my tea when I see the shadow touching that stone, and he said it's the same all year through, and I thought, oh, wonderful clock, fantastic. But here, just to finish, I wanted to say I'm also interested in photographing landscape, and landscape formation. I can't go inside the volcano, unfortunately, but then I went to the desert, in the Atacama Desert. It was a fantastic experience. It's a place where some of the Atacama Desert never rains. They have, in history, never recorded rain. There, 2 millimeter, 92. It's extremely dry. It's an incredible landscape. It's harsh. It's heartbreaking to think about this absence of water. I was not up at the 5,000 meter Atacama, but close to the sea, where during a period of 3 months every year, there is some fog that comes and touch the ground and stay there very gently, come from the sea. And when the temperature is strong or cold enough, it runs into the desert. It comes in very violently. My camera was moving, everything was trembling, I could barely keep it together, and disappears into the desert. It's incredible. No cloud, no rain, nothing. But I was wet, completely wet. The water is there. So some wonderful architect, anthropologist, a priest, and other people have been thinking, what shall we do? And they build those, they're called fog catcher. They build the most simple tool to make water. Good night, they can make up to 500 liters of water with this most simple design ever. A piece of textile in the right position with a tube, cut it in two, a container, and they have water. With the wind, the water spills out into the ground, and seed that have been sitting there for 200 years can come out. So with this last project, where we are dealing with so many strong problems of absence of water, difficult soil, I wanted to celebrate the capacity of making beautiful design, that sometimes the most simple design can give a new opportunity that you never thought about. So with this beautiful image of cloud dancing, I wanted to thank you to listen to my stories.